Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? This week, there's news on yet more symptoms of the CCP virus. One of the vaccines has been unexpectedly halted. There are strange phenomena occurring when you find foreign objects in your nose. Mysterious stone jars can be explained somewhat. These news items and more have occurred in the past week. Let's begin with the newest CCP virus symptom. It's a rash. This is a rash on top of the more predictable side effects or symptoms such as fever, coughing, and so on. Then there are the less obvious side effects, such as a loss of your sense of taste or smell. Then there are things like the cognitive dysfunction that we're seeing, heart damage, blood clotting problems, and so on. In the hierarchy of complications from the CCP virus, this is towards the more mundane end, but still yet another concerning symptom in something that we're already not entirely clear about. As with many of the more unusual symptoms we're seeing from the CCP virus, this is primarily showing up in adolescents and young adults. They also tend to have little to no other symptoms. The exact cause, and even if it is directly related to the CCP virus, is unclear. There are a few theories at least. Most of these involve the immunological response to the virus, particularly the production of interferons. These are involved in the response to a virus in particular. If the production of interferons is extremely high, it helps to get rid of the virus, but it also causes damage to the blood vessels. This leads to inflammation. Inflammation can then lead to things like rashes on your skin. Hopefully, as more studies and larger samples come out, the exact relationship between these rashes and the CCP virus will be made clear. With the concerning side effects, there are also at least some concerns at the moment about the AstraZeneca vaccine. The concerns are there, but there are no health issues. And that's an important caveat. The issue is that AstraZeneca's vaccine may be involved in the formation of blood clots. This means that although it may occur, there's also a chance that this may not be a direct effect of the vaccine itself. Considering the benefits we're seeing from vaccines, particularly with states in America being able to reopen in theory, many countries seeing a drastic decrease in the spread of the CCP virus, and more. The concern here is warranted, but you shouldn't be alarmed by it. The reason we say it this way is that several countries have stopped using the university-AstraZeneca vaccine because they're concerned it could be linked to blood clots. The problem is there's no current established link between blood clots and the vaccine. In general, analysis so far of people who have been vaccinated finds that there are no more common instances of blood clot events than those seen in the general population. That means that it is safe, and what they're seeing there is simply unfortunate timing insofar as things have been noticed after the vaccine was given. This is, in a manner of speaking, similar to the phenomena seen with autism. Parents are more observant of children after vaccines, hoping to catch any side effects before they become a problem. During this time, they notice behaviors in their children that they've previously not noticed. At the moment, we're seeing that the vaccine has some people concerned because they're noticing that it's occurring, but when you look at the numbers, there's no great issue here. While on the topic of vaccines, we should address the elephant in the room this week, which is claims going around social media that the vaccines can cause fertility issues. This is a truly bizarre and ignorant statement to make. The nature of these vaccines, like say the influenza vaccine or most others, so far has not affected fertility, and given that the CCP virus vaccines are not that drastically different, why would we see fertility issues with this? When you start coupling it with animal studies, which clearly show there's been no alteration to fertility, and then human studies, the claims themselves start looking not only incredibly shaky, but downright fraudulent. Messenger RNA vaccines essentially incorporate just a small fraction of the total virus's genome, just enough that the body can begin to produce the viral spike that is a primary identifier of the virus as a whole. This allows the immune system to begin recognizing that particular element before someone is infected by the CCP virus, or after they've been infected and it's been a period since. This is in all effect just like the influenza vaccine. The body then has a knowledge of what to target and how to deal with it. This means that when they do encounter the pathogen, whether that is influenza, the CCP virus, chickenpox virus, and many others, the body has the ability to call on cells that have already been trained to deal with it and mount the immune response much quicker and much more effectively. None of these things at any point involve damage to the reproductive systems. Conversely, it's been identified that particularly in males, that infection by the CCP virus can harm fertility to some extent, although since it's been such a short period since the outbreak began in relative terms, it's hard to judge just exactly how impactful this is on long-term reproductive ability. With at least 4 vaccines available in America at the moment, these being Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and now Johnson & Johnson, the government, or at least agencies under the government, are increasingly looking at lifting restrictions. Perhaps the one that people will feel most immediately is the ability to hug others. The CDC has, now that the vaccines have started to roll out on a large enough scale, said that people can begin hugging each other under certain circumstances. The first of these is that it must be an environment in which masks are not required. All the people must be vaccinated, and that it's generally only for those family members who are going to be in a situation in which they're not going to have any risk of possibly passing it on to someone else who has or is in a high-risk category. The CDC makes very clear that vaccinated does not mean that you are immediately able to go off and engage in this sort of behavior. You need to wait at least 2 weeks, and this is because it takes 2 weeks for the body to be able to develop that immune response, have those cells ready to go for case you get infected, and ensure that your body has been cleared of any virus that could be present. That is 2 weeks after the final dose of any of the vaccines that you've been given, whether this is the Moderna or Pfizer 2-dose system or the 1-dose system for Johnson & Johnson. Hugging is just one of the number of things that the CDC has begun to relax restrictions on among groups who have been vaccinated. Under most circumstances, the CDC still advises that even if you are vaccinated and you're in an environment where you might be at risk of either picking up or carrying the virus, that you should still wear a mask. If you are going to wear a mask, then a reusable mask is generally considered ideal. Among the many options of reusable masks, there are different levels of what's considered good. Cotton has sat at the top for quite a while now. Exactly why cotton is the best has been something of a mystery that we may have largely now solved. Research from the US National Institute of Standards and Technology looked at why cotton performs better. They took 9 types of cotton and 6 types of synthetic fiber and ran these through tests that simulated breathing. What they found was that when cotton fibers become moist from your breathing, they actually perform better as a filter. This means that it slows down the CCP virus, allowing for less propulsion of the viral particles when you're breathing. The moist cotton had about 33% better performance than dry cotton did. The researchers make sure to clarify that when they say moist. They're not referring to the mask being wet. Rather, that the amount of moisture in it is equal to the amount that you'll be breathing out, which is a very small amount. Less than a handful of milliliters of fluid. This combined with the structure of cotton, particularly flannel cotton, allowed for the virus particles to bind to or be slowed down by the cotton. While on the topic of viruses, diseases, and similar, we should look at the flip side. That is, when the immune system misbehaves. Largely, when we're talking about allergies and autoimmune diseases. These are situations in which the body begins to identify itself as a foreign pathogen, rallies the immune system, and the immune system begins to attack your own body. In the case of asthma, this is an overreaction to a very small stimuli, which then prevents the body from breathing properly. In other instances, it could be destroying cells that you need for particular purposes, such as production of insulin. In extreme cases, it could be small stimuli such as nuts, lactose, and more lead to the GI tract being damaged. This can, in extreme cases, lead to anaphylaxis, which can then in turn cause death. Being able to get on top of this has been a long sought after goal for a number of reasons. The simplest of which is that being able to at least reduce the severity of allergies and autoimmune conditions will drastically improve the quality of life of those who have them. Researchers have identified a particular protein. This protein is called Neuritin. Neuritin will play a big role, at least in theory, in controlling these allergies and autoimmune conditions. What it does is help to regulate plasma cells, particularly plasma cells that begin to identify the self, leading to these conditions. The very short and simple summary of their research, which has already taken 5 years to get to this stage, is that mice that did not produce the Neuritin had a much higher mortality rate when they were given any kind of protein. This protein caused a chain reaction of events that all circled around the body beginning to produce immune cells that would target the body, thereby leading to the conditions that would kill the mice by effectively their own immune system. When they started to artificially infuse Neuritin into the otherwise unhealthy mice, they found that they had a much better rate of survival. In theory, if Neuritin could be turned into a drug, it could be an extremely efficient and effective way to get on top of autoimmune diseases and allergies. Going from things which could kill at a very young age to something that bizarrely didn't kill at a very young age. It's a case study of a teen who had nasal congestion for 8 years, give or take, and kept complaining of a bad smell. The bad smell was caused by the BB gun pellet that was in his nose. That summarizes the whole history of the case study, but the actual process to get to finding that BB is... It begins by the young teen patient presenting to the hospital when he was 16. They were complaining about nasal symptoms. They were given a course of antihistamines and a nasal spray. They were then told to come back between 1 and 1.5 months later. They returned roughly 12 months later. The problem was that it had now gone from the inconvenience of a congested nose through to the issue of not only having a congested nose, but there being an incredibly foul odor whenever they blew their nose. This is when they performed a CT scan and found the spherical BB. It was not able to be found visually, not because it wasn't obvious, rather the body had healed over the BB, sealing it in, and this is why it was only visible under a CT scan. It could only be found visually after surgery to remove some of the tissue that had grown over it. That is, tissue that had grown over it over a period of roughly 8 years. It is things like this that make us wonder how we've survived natural selection for as long as we have. Compared to some of our ape cousins, we tend to be more prone to doing dumb and dangerous things. At least one small thing we have over our ape cousins is that we appear to be more water efficient as an organism. Researchers looking at apes, including the naked ape, found that humans need about 3 liters of fluid a day. Apes such as chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas need 6 liters of liquid a day. This doubling of the requirements between species is somewhat significant. Most of the other apes are not naked, and as a result, humans need to have ways to compensate for the heat and activities they get up to. This is largely done through sweat glands. Sweat glands secrete largely water, and you'd think that this would lead to an increased demand for fluid intake. Despite that, it's not the case. While there are theories about both the anatomy of humans and their diet versus that of the apes, exactly why humans have such a significantly lower requirement for fluids than their ape counterparts is something of a mystery. Our final news item for this week is about the large stone jars in the Laos plains. This is a location called the Plain of Jars. Unsurprisingly, you can imagine what you would find there. These are large stone jars carved out of stone. They even have lids. Due to the nature of the site it's largely been inaccessible. The site was one of the locations, at least, in which America would drop a large amount of ordnance throughout various wars. This included mines, bombs, and more, and as a result, accessing these large stone jars has been difficult. Recently, at least, the researchers have been able to access them and begin looking at some select samples. These select samples, along with an analysis technique called optically stimulated luminescence, has both dated the location and found evidence of what was happening within these large jars. They were put there nearly 4,000 years ago, roughly the 2nd millennium BCE. Within these large jars are remains of humans, pretty much entirely skeletal at this point. Some were bundled, others were simply masses of bones put into one large location. The sites appear to have been reused as needed, since there are multiple locations that show evidence of use both before and after the current remains have been identified. While we may now know when they were put there and what they were used for, there's still a very large question about how they got there. This was more than 4,000 years ago now, and they moved stones that weighed up to 30 ton, over 8 kilometers. How exactly this happened, much like Stonehenge, the pyramids, and more, is a mystery. That's all the news items we have for you this week. Thank you for watching. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.